Thank you once again for listening to our amazing conversation with the founders of Game to Grow. I wanted to highlight for a second that they're a non-for-profit charity. So if you really enjoyed our podcast and you really like the kind of games that they're running, you can head over to their website and you can donate. And I know that that would make the world of difference to them and also the people who spend time at their tables. Also, if you are interested in the Critical Core program and game set that they are currently making in a Kickstarter. They said this, but I just kind of wanted to highlight it again. Signing up to their newsletter or to the sign-up letter that you can do will really help them in this process. So if this sounds cool, take a minute and there might be some really cool stuff that happens because of it. So thanks again. And I gotta go because I think my son booped himself.
Hello there. I'm Air. I use he, him.
I'm Leap. I use he, him.
And this is Insight Check, where we delve into the dungeon of your bad decisions to retrieve the treasure of wisdom. And today we've got two very special guests with us. We have two Adams for the price of 5 Adams. I don't know how many Adams we paid up front, but we have both Adam J and Adam D from Game to Grow. Welcome, gentlemen, to Insight Check.
Thanks so much for having us.
Yeah, very appreciative to have you here. I know that we've kind of seen your efforts throughout the D&D community. Leap and I are both avid C-Team fans, and we saw you on there during their table talk section, and we're super excited to have you on to talk with us today.
Yeah, we're really excited to be here, and it was super fun to be on C-Team as well.
They're a pretty rad group of people.
For our listeners, in case you have been missing Air's sweet voice, he has been busy with a new addition to his family, and so both he and I are holding fresh babies while we are doing this pod. Get them while they're hot. And so
very fresh, farm to cradle.
Farm to cradle. Exactly. All organic, right? I think, I don't know how that works. I'm going to stop. But now that we've done some silliness, we are huge fans, and a huge amount of our community and our listeners will already know you guys, and know a little bit about Game to Grow. You know, something that I'm always really interested in when we have guests is, how did you both get involved in tabletop RPGs?
Hey, that's a great question. Big question. Do you mean how we got started as like players, or how we transitioned from players into like professionals?
You know, like, where did you guys start? Like, how did you guys start as gamers? And then yeah, as from there, when did you decide, and how did you decide to create what you've created?
So I think I had the story like a lot of people did, where my older brother taught me how to play Dungeons and Dragons. I was like a classic kid who got taught by an older brother. I was at Boy Scout camp in the early 90s. My brother taught me how to play D&D, and we were doing a lot of like just making up stories. We didn't always have the whole setup because we were in a tent at Boy Scout camp. But we had lots of the books, and I grew up in a small town in Texas, so I would like go to the mall as like the thing to do on a weekend. And then I would go to Walden Books and just kind of like hang out and look at the Encyclopedia Magica and just let my imagination run. That was a big part of my youth, was just looking at D&D books. And then I started playing more seriously with like actual rule books and actually knowing what I was doing in middle school. And that was when I got like really into it. I was one of those kids, like I wasn't like writing Corn or Tool or anything on my binder. I was writing Dragonlance. And I was like really into it. I had like turned in lots of art projects in my art class that were just the Dragonlance logo.
This is incredible. A little known fact, but Adam actually used to run a Dragonlance website back in the like early GeoCities website days.
It was like a handwritten history of Kryn. On my GeoCities. I think it was like WBS or one of those like even pre-Angel Fire websites. My nerd runs deep.
I can already see it like deep purple letters like Tales of Kryn, fire gifs on either side of the title.
Oh yeah, they were really pixelated. It was probably some Blink text in there too.
Oh yeah.
I can already tell you're a rad DM because you're already painting me a word picture and I'm just there. Like,
yeah, it was Web 1.0, man. It was classic.
awesome.
And then I guess I started playing. I was probably 8 or 10. I started playing with a friend that was down the street. I had moved from Pennsylvania to Flagstaff, Arizona, and my friend just down the street from me had a player's handbook, and we didn't know any of the rules. We just like to open it up and look at all the pictures and read all the spell descriptions and stuff. And so all of us played paladins because we thought it was the most powerful class in the game. Because he could cast spells and he could use melee weapons. Clearly, he's the most powerful.
You were gishing it up before it was cool.
Yeah. And then we started playing. We got really into it, and it was just a lot of telling stories. We always did the same plot line. There was an evil king, and we would get captured by the evil king when we went to confront him or them. They would put us in the dungeon. And then in the dungeon, we'd have to escape and get our weapons back and then go kill the evil ruler. And that was basically, it was the same plotline. We did that, 15 times or 20 times, run by different dungeon masters, until finally one of my friends decided that he didn't like that we were all casting Fireball. And he was like, I don't think that paladins can cast that spell. And all of a sudden we had to go and learn all the rules to the game.
Oh, I love that. That's incredible.
And then I guess I played all through high school and then all through college, and I've been a longtime player for all of that until I still have been, but things kind of changed when I met Adam in grad school.
I didn't actually play from middle school. I played a lot in middle school, and then when I went to high school, a lot of my natural friend group changed because I went to a different high school than the middle school friends that I had who were my Dungeons and Dragons friends. So I sort of took a break from D&D until after college. In college, I became an actor, and I became really involved, and like as a student actor, and then after I graduated, I was an actor in the Seattle Fringe theater scene, and that just takes up your entire life. So I was performing in rehearsals and all that, and I was getting a lot of like my role-playing needs met, I guess, as an actor. And then it wasn't until I had a group of friends I like randomly met at a bar who one of them had a flaming D20 tattoo on his forearm, and I was like, you are my people. Let's hang out. And that was my buddy Bob. He ended up playing a Bardbarian in our campaign that lasted from like 2008 until like 2012. We played like once a week. Yeah, it was awesome. And I also played with, you guys may have heard of Brandish Gillum, who is also known as Hankerin Furinail on the Drunkens and Dragons podcast.
Oh, yeah.
He was my game master, and we played together for years and years too. So we played for so many years, and then I transitioned from being an actor to being an acting teacher, and then started studying drama therapy because as an acting teacher, I was seeing how teaching drama and helping kids play characters and think about the world through somebody else's eyes was like helping them build confidence and build communication skills and all kinds of stuff. So I realized I didn't really want to train actors. I really wanted to help kids learn and grow through theater. So then I started studying drama therapy at Antioch University, Seattle, where I met Adam, and Adam and I were like totally, once again, one of those across the room, I see you, you have dice, I have dice, we're going to be friends. One of those things. And at the time I was picking up a side job because grad school, you have to have a side job. And I was working I wanted to work with kids. So I picked up a side job working at sort of an after school program where some kids had the opportunity to play Dungeons and Dragons. It was a social group for kids who were kind of awkward, antisocial. A lot of them had diagnoses of autism or something that was just meant that they didn't quite fit in with other social groups. So this particular Dungeons and Dragons group was like not facilitated by an adult. It was just a place where kids could come like play D&D. And I took that over while I was studying drama therapy. And then I started like thinking about how Dungeons and Dragons is really an opportunity for all of the stuff that I wanted to do with drama therapy, but just sitting down and rolling dice. And then my co-facilitator left to pursue something else, and so I had an empty spot as my co-facilitator. So I approached Adam and invited him to join the journey.
So Adam came up to me after our classes one day and said, "Hey, do you want to get paid to come be a dungeon master for socially awkward kids?" And I was, yeah, absolutely. I would love to do that. And I was in school for couple and family therapy, so it was a great combination of my schooling and opportunity to conceptualize. When you're in grad school, you do a lot. You like learn all the theory and stuff, and you get like really deep and gritty into the theory, and a chance to think about that application was just an amazing opportunity. Not to mention, obviously, play D&D and get paid for it.
Yeah, that sounds like the dream, really. Like
We basically like started using all the stuff we were learning in grad school and thinking about that and talking about it. And Adam and I would like have plenty of time to plan our groups. And so we started thinking about using that stuff when we were planning for the Dungeons and Dragons campaigns.
And we started to realize just how much we could do with it. We started to see how the players at our table were being impacted by their characters, or how they were putting personal things into the game, how they were bringing in their experiences, and then how they were growing through the character experiences that we were creating for them. And so we started really focusing, really being very purposeful about the way we created the game and the things we did in the game to incorporate all of the drama therapy and education background that Adam was bringing in, and the marriage and family therapy background that I was bringing in. And I guess from the beginning didn't realize just how powerful it would be, and now have had an amazing opportunity to see the incredible growth that's created.
I almost want to ask, like, we seem to be in kind of this golden age renaissance of like TTRPGs, which is, I would say, being led by 5e. Do you think that much of what you're seeing in terms of the therapeutic uses of D&D is kind of contributing to that? Because I know a lot of people who have picked up D&D for the first time that I've spoken to or heard talking about it, kind of mention that therapeutic element, the chance to wander in your imagination, the chance to play make-believe and, get in touch with the more youthful aspects of your psychology. Not that it's necessarily a child thing, but normally it's only reserved for that time in your life. So do you think that's kind of gone hand in hand with the resurgence, is people finding this as an outlet?
Yeah, I actually think that it's sort of an interesting coalescing of a lot of different factors. I heard a stat from Mike Shea or Sly Flourish on Twitter that the D&D audience has more than doubled in the last 2 years.
wow.
So
Okay.
crazy.
Yeah, it's totally incredible.
Yeah.
And I think part of that is streaming that's really made watching D&D and a different way to partake in the hobby, and as well as like helping a lot of people go, oh, well, now that I know what it looks like, maybe I can try that on my own. And so a lot more people are getting involved, and a lot more people are starting their own games or joining other people's games. But then I also think that there's an aspect here that is an acceptance of geek interests and geek ideas as being not necessarily the previously thought of demonic things that
Yeah, totally.
The shadow of the satanic panic, just
Right,
always
exactly.
there. Yes.
and it still definitely exists, but a lot of the people who were kids in the 70s and 80s are now adults with families and with jobs, and can reflect back on those experiences and go, well, I liked playing D&D, or I always wanted to play D&D, and I don't really think it's devil worship, so now I'm going to get more into it now that I finally have the space to think about my life and maybe my kids' lives too.
The only demons D&D connects you to are your personal ones.
Or your friends.
I like that. That's
Or
really
the
good.
chain
Depends on
ones.
your
Yeah,
friends,
yeah,
I
yeah.
guess.
So you guys started this together. You had this this place where you were getting paid to DM with these kids. When did that officially change into Game to Grow, and what was that process like exactly?
So when we left that organization largely because we knew we were onto something that was gigantic. We already had a bunch of stories of kids growing with all the intentional work that we were doing with Dungeons and Dragons, and we wanted to like do research. We wanted to codify it. We wanted to get really into it and take it to the next level. And the organization, that's just not part of their mission. So we left to strike out and open up our own organization. So that was Wheelhouse Workshop, which was the for-profit company Adam and I ran for several years before we opened Game to Grow. And Wheelhouse Workshop was this idea that we had that we could make the world a better place with Dungeons and Dragons and other kinds of games. And we opened up a website and we assumed that everybody would know just how beautiful this idea was. But we didn't know a lot about like exactly how Google worked. We were trained as a drama therapist and as a family therapist. So we created a website and we, waited for people to find us.
And they didn't really. That's actually not really how the world is not the field of dreams.
I was going to say Field of Dreams lied to a generation of starry-eyed young people. Yes,
we've grown up with very strong misconceptions.
That's pretty much exactly what happened to us. So we started that. We had a website, and we went months before we had any nibbles, and we were sending out emails and going to talk to PTAs, and we did a lot of outreach, and it took a long time before we had the first bite. When we just kind of, the stars aligned and we got 3 people interested all at the same time, which is, to have a social group, you can't have one kid. You can't have one kid in a good D&D game. So we had 3 kids who all aligned at the same time. And then we opened up our first group out of Kirkland, which is just east of Seattle. And then we ran that group for a while, and then the word started to spread. We got better at advertising, and that was sort of in the dark days of Facebook when you could do very targeted advertising. So we really did a lot of targeted ads on Facebook, which really did a nice number about just getting the word out very specifically to parents in our region. And so eventually we got a little bit of word of mouth going. We were doing a lot more presentations at cons and stuff. So we were getting the word out through presenting. We got like honestly, it was Jerry Holkins who randomly mentioned us on one of his blog posts after talking to Adam Johns' wife at an Enforcer event that like also just happened to be right place, right time kind of thing, where we got a bunch of attention from there. And then one thing led to another, and then our groups were full. We opened up new groups, and then those groups filled up, and we launched Game to Grow in 2017 after a crowdfunding campaign. And we had actually been wanting to go nonprofit for a long time, but really kind of needed to get a proof of concept about the effectiveness of this work. And we were in grad school, and starting a nonprofit can be a daunting task.
It's definitely a lot more work than running a for-profit, especially the way we were running a for-profit, which is sort of shooting from the hip.
For sure.
But now the goal of Game to Grow is also so much more broad. Wheelhouse Workshop was really designed to be like, we want to run groups in the Seattle area. We want to, use Dungeons and Dragons to help kids and teens therapeutically build social skills. And that's something we still do at Game to Grow, but the Game to Grow mission also incorporates games of all kinds and challenges of all kinds. So we have a lot more opportunity to grow, as well as a lot more opportunity to try to get it to other places. We realized that this was something that was powerful, and Wheelhouse Workshop was always just going to be Adam and I. But Game to Grow could be something that's bigger than the two of us, and that can be something that can serve the world.
Well, I want to talk about, if we can, you work so much with young people in Game to Grow using TTRPGs. I believe you've mentioned, Paddle, that you feel D&D maybe isn't the best way to start a new young player in a TTRPG. And so we're wondering, and we thought our listeners could benefit by saying like what other systems you've looked at, or in what ways you may have modified D&D in order to make it run more smoothly when you're running for kids.
Yeah, we actually did a panel about this with Ethan Schoonover at PAX Unplugged, where we go through a lot of the steps.
Huge fan.
Ethan's actually a part of the Game to Grow team now.
Oh, that's awesome.
And he's got a lot of great insights. And if listeners don't already follow him on Twitter, it's at Ethan Schoonover, and he's got a lot of great insights about how to run a D&D game for kids also. Most of the games that we run are Dungeons and Dragons, and the way that we introduce them to our players is very slow. And I would say that's how we would recommend anybody play new games with kids is get started right away, but go really slow. One important thing to remember is that making characters is super interesting and super fun if you know the game. But if you don't know the game, then making characters is confusing and probably boring.
Like, I cannot tell you the godsend that like D&D Beyond has been for me, because I love making characters, but I do not want to do all the math and all of the
What I really liked about the panel that you guys did was how basically both you guys and Ethan talked about how you basically set up every small kind of event that you could have in Dungeons and Dragons as like just to get players used to it, right? Like you did. I mean, I would love for you to go into this a little bit without going over the whole panel, because the panel itself is really worth watching for our listeners. But I love how you intentionally created the beginning to introduce the different elements that a player would come across in Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah, so it's definitely important to start off with a hook to make sure the players like get started right away. If you think about it like a video game, like really good modern video games start off with a sort of tutorial that's also kind of a hook to get you invested in the game. Like the game starts right away, but it shows you, like, you walk over to the weapon and then it says push A, and then that's how you pick things up. And then push A and now it's how you attack, right? That's how video games, modern video games especially, teach people how to play. Older video games would have like a manual you'd have to read to show you how to play. And I think D&D, older versions of it were very much that way. Very much like we have to know how the rules work before we can get started playing. And I think that's antiquated. And the best way to get kids playing, especially if they also play video games, is they don't have the endurance to learn how to play the game before they play. They want to learn right away. So we have a very common starting adventure that we do that starts off with Seamus in the soup kitchen. And I would love it if Adam would tell the story of Seamus in the soup kitchen, because he tells the story really well.
Sure. So Seamus is a character that we love to use as our starting adventure. So we will often do the classic sort of tavern start, where all the players' characters all come into a tavern or find their way into a tavern in one town, and then they sit down and then they meet each other through sort of the happenstance that happens in this tavern. And oftentimes what we use is Seamus. So the player comes in, as their character comes in, and sits down at the table, and then Seamus comes up and greets them. And Seamus, Adam and I have different voices that we do for Seamus, but Seamus is always like a warm and welcoming guy. So my voice for Seamus sort of goes like, "Hello and welcome to the tavern. Oh, that's a great big sword you've got there. Oh, that looks really nice. You've got to be an adventurer to have something like that." And Seamus will always remark on whatever the player has on them, or however they've described their character. And Seamus is just a friendly guy. He loves whatever you say, and he loves however you have described your character. "Oh, you're covered in shadow there. That must be really dark, hard to see stuff that way." He's just ready to go along with anything. And then the players order some soup. This is a soup tavern. It's worthwhile to mention, we don't have any alcohol in our games, so everybody just drinks frothy golden soup from their mugs.
It's perfect. I love it.
So Seamus is the soup maven, and Seamus also has every soup you can possibly imagine. And so players, no matter what they ask for, Seamus will say he totally has it, and he'll bring out that soup. So we've had players ask for dragon's breath soup and fire soup and crazy soups like potato leek soup. And then so Seamus will say, what can I get for you? What kind of soup are you in the mood for? And the player will go like, "I want nothing." And Seamus will say, "Oh, nothing soup. I love that. It's so light and airy. I'll go and get you a tankard of nothing soup." And Seamus leaves, and he kind of greets everybody as they come in.
Oh, I just wanted to say I absolutely love that you're giving your players and these kids agency in the world building, like right off the hop.
Oh yeah, it's absolutely a kind of a super important part of our model, and the sort of play aspect of the game that Adam and I love so much. So Seamus kind of goes through and he serves everybody all their tankards of soup and interacts with all the characters, and then all of a sudden the soup tavern becomes under attack. And a man in dark and black armor bursts through the wall and takes out a knife and stabs Seamus. And
I'm already deeply invested in Seamus. This will not stand.
Adam has
I'm
told
rolling a
this
D20
story
as we speak. Yeah.
Adam has told this story in front of audiences of like 200 people, and that the gasp you just let out is like exactly what the audience does every time.
It's wonderful. So that experience. So you just met Seamus. Seamus is like 30 seconds old at this point. But Seamus is an endearing character, and he's wonderful. And when Seamus gets stabbed by this man in black armor, all of a sudden, all these players who otherwise have trouble making friends, who otherwise are sitting down at a table with a bunch of strangers that they don't know and don't have the tools to really learn how to interact with very well. But now they are bonded together. Now they know they have a quest that they will go after because they all have a common enemy. And it's worthwhile, especially as we're talking about like playing with younger kids. Seamus doesn't always die. Often of times the players will go in and take him to the healer, and then the healer will say, you need to get me a special flower from the swamp, and with that flower from the swamp I can heal Seamus or partially heal him. We've had stories where, and this is where the story will often change. We've had stories where players like preserve just Seamus's head. And then they carry around his head in a bag.
Necromancer who was like, I want to raise him, I want to resurrect him, and we were like, well, you're a pretty low level necromancer, but give it a roll. He like rolled a natural 20 or something, and it was like, well, he got a natural 20, so you don't get all of Seamus.
You preserved his head.
Yeah.
You future-robbed him. Yeah.
Right. But the secret there was the head was bound to him from then on, so he couldn't get rid of Seamus either. So then they would take Seamus out of his bag every once in a while and would ask him questions about soup recipes and various other things that he was interested in, or ask him to help them. And they use that going on forward. We also had a group of players bind him to a deck of playing cards.
Cool.
So then his soul was in the deck of playing cards, and I would put both my hands together flat and like move them up and down like he was talking as the deck of playing cards.
Oh, I thought it was like a Terra or Taroka thing where it was like, Seamus, what should we do? Oh, Ace of Spades. That means run. Like
that's actually a pretty good idea too.
That is a pretty good idea. Maybe I'll use that next time.
Seamus is the first NPC that they've met. So this is like a great way to sort of show, this is the first time that they've seen the game master, Adam or I as the game master, like being definitely not ourselves. We are now very much a character. And so that's a great introduction to like just how this works. Because Seamus might have gotten attacked or died, but like Adam's still sitting there in the game master chair, which is a really good introduction to like the sort of high stakes nature of a Dungeons and Dragons style game. But also like we're playing, I'm fine, I'm right here, and my character is the one who's dead, and I'm fine. So then there's some like great intro and a hook, like we said, and then sometimes Seamus will like in his last dying breaths say something like, he's after the magic item underneath the soup tavern. And then the players have to go investigate. And then what we basically do from there is like a tutorial, like I mentioned earlier, but like now that there's a sequence of rooms underneath the soup tavern, which leads them to a magic item and a big boss battle. So basically they go room after room underneath the soup. So like they go in the back room. Seamus might say something like, go to the supply closet. It's in the supply closet. And they go to the supply closet and there's nothing there. Just a supply closet. But now we have to teach them how to use their skills to search, how to look around in there. They can think outside the box, but they do some skill checks and they see, okay, cool. You discover that there's like a small gap in the stones behind the cupboard with all the chicken stock on it. So then they pull that behind. They use a strength check or use a weapon to like for leverage. They're being creative, and then they see that there's now a tunnel. And then one room after another, we teach them something else. There might be a pit where they have to use some lateral thinking, some creative problem solving to get across a random pit that's in this dungeon. Or maybe there's some spiders that attack, and then we can sort of break the game down. Spiders, there's no moral conundrum when you're fighting giant spiders. It's just we have to survive. But then they can learn how initiative works and how their attack rolls and armor class and stuff like that works. And then the next room, there's a ghost, and the ghost locks them in a room and will only let them out of this particular room if they tell him a joke that makes him laugh.
So ultimately what we want to do is we want to say, and we will often even directly say this, where we hand them a character sheet and then say, ignore everything on here. We're going to get to this. We will explain anytime you need something, we will point out where it is on the character sheet and talk to you about what that means. And then we can jump right into the game. We can jump right into the experience. And as you kind of heard, like we do a lot of goofy voices and a lot of interaction that really helps the players feel like they're in the world and like their voice in that world matters. And those really help to create an experience where they're jumping in and having fun right away.
It's amazing. I'm a teacher by trade, and I run a Dungeons and Dragons groups at my school as well. And there's that moment that kids have when they see an adult playing make believe as hard or harder than they are, and the permission that it gives them to do the same is a really cool thing. Like in the stream that you did with Ethan at PAX Unplugs, you talk about the different ages that you do, but my kids start at about somewhere between 11 and the oldest are 14, and so they're right on that cusp of like kind of leaving that behind, but then seeing you don't have to, right? And that there's an allowed nature of the game, and in fact it's encouraged to ham it up and be silly and over dramatic while still being kind of creative and cool and adventure-y. It's like a really cool opportunity for young people, you know?
Yeah, I think that's especially true for them to see a male teacher do that. I think that's like a thing that we have as society sort of under reinforced, like adult males, like not being like stoic. And I think it's important that we can, as teachers and as people who are responsible for ushering in the next generation of adults, to say, hey, we can be silly. We don't have to be stoic. We don't have to be strong.
Absolutely. That whole kind of toxic element of, and when I became a man, I put away childish things. I'm like, no, I didn't. I just dusted them back off by the time I realized, like, you know, in my 30s, like, no, dice and dragons are rad. Like,
yeah, they have more meaning now.
Yes.
Yeah. I didn't put them away. I got better at them.
Hell yeah.
Exactly.
That's why you're so impressed, kids. I've been at this for years. Can I ask, both of you have a theatrical background, it sounds like, and I'm imagining when you're in the DM's chair, there is a lot of, you know, that thespian muscle being stretched. If you have a kid who's more of a narrative, like third person, my character does this sort of thing, is there like ways that you work to try to like lean into that style as well, or reinforce them in doing that? Like, is that like a talk at the table about like, there's lots of different ways to play your character?
So there's an interesting play here with the idea of using third person and first person as your character. And especially as a therapeutic tool, there are times where it's very important for a player to use a first person perspective. When their character is being successful, and especially if that success is a part of their personal growth and their personal journey, we want them to use first person, because now all of a sudden they get to build the confidence that their character had in becoming successful there. An example of this might be if we had like a quiet or shy kid who is having trouble speaking up, having trouble taking up space. We might put them in a situation where their character has to convince a king to help them. And for them, talking to a king or talking to this group of people, maybe it's a whole room of people, might be a big step to imagine themselves in that situation. And so they might say something like, my character convinces them that this is the right thing to do. And we might push them a little bit harder. We might ask them to take the next step and say, what does that look like? What does your character say exactly? Say it as your character. And for some players, that might be too big a step, and we would keep that in mind. But for players who can take that step, then we can say, we can reward them for being in first person in that way. We can, when they say, come on, you can help us, and we need your help. Now all of a sudden they are their character, and when we say, yes, the king says, you've convinced me, and I'll go along with your quest. Now they get to internalize that success that their character had in being convincing and in being socially capable and in taking up space. But we can also obviously still do that in third person too. But helping them bridge that gap and get deeper into the experience can often be an opportunity to help them also grow more through the experiences their character has.
I also, as a game master, I don't have, and this is one of the cardinal rules that we train people with when we're doing consultations or trainings too, is never have a player roll for something if you can't handle them being successful or you can't handle them failing. And a lot of our players who are socially isolated and struggle a lot with their confidence if they're in character, if they're speaking as their character, whether or not they're doing an affect or a voice. But if they're speaking in first person or using using their character's voice to speak to that person, I don't want to, and that was a big risk for them. I don't want to then have them roll a persuasion check and fail it, because they will internalize that failure, even though the dice roll has nothing to do with their actual affected performance. I can't let those things be connected. So I oftentimes, as a dungeon master, have my players very rarely ever roll persuasion. Sometimes I'll have them roll to see if they're lying, but I very rarely ever have them roll persuasion, because my kids almost always are taking a risk when they're verbalizing the persuasion. So if they'll say in third person, my character is going to try to tell him that I'm his long lost brother, I would say, okay, cool, roll for that or whatever to see what happens. Or if he says, like, I'm going to try to convince him to lower the price, I'll say roll persuasion. But if he's in character and he like makes a really good, honest, like, we're trying to save the world and I need this weapon because I've got to go into a dungeon and fight monsters after this. If he does a really nice job trying to persuade me, I will then most likely skip the roll entirely and just let him have the benefit, because I'm going to be in character too. That's definitely something that we have to be thoughtful about when they're using the first person. We want to make sure that we are being conscious of what that means to them and what kinds of like risks they're taking by doing that, especially the people in the demographics that we work with.
Obviously, for the groups you're working with, having that kind of empathetic ear and knowing when and where to kind of have a let, because it's really reinforcing kind of the meta level of getting those social skills and making you feel more confident and whatnot. I had never thought of like the third person thing as anything more than a preference. It's so interesting to hear. Yes, of course, you'd internalize it more when you say, I'm doing this. That is very interesting. I think all DMs could benefit from that. Like, I know this player's having a rough night. If I can kind of really develop that empathy in myself, I'm not going to make them roll because I know they need a win. Because I know I've had nights like that where I've come to the game and just been like, this is my, stress release time and whatnot. Like, I really hope this goes well.
Sometimes when I do have them roll, I'll have them roll first. So if they like want to, this is kids that I know can handle it. And a lot of social skills building is about practice and then reflection or feedback. And so it's useful to practice and get feedback for things that don't work, right? So if they want to roll persuasion and they say, I want to roll persuasion to convince him of a thing. And then I will have them roll persuasion. And if they roll really low, I'll still have them tell me what didn't go well. So, okay, act out somebody who's really flubbing trying to get their needs met in this situation, because then they can verbalize, or they can use their embodiment to like look at the floor, to pace back and forth, to pop their fingers, or some sort of like unfortunate externalizing behavior that might interfere with their success in a social situation. So there's a lot to be said for analyzing both successes and non-successes. It's just about understanding what the risk-taking element of that is, because modeling is a super effective way to build social skills already, plus practice and feedback. So there's so much that can happen in that space, and we can choose dice rolls or no dice rolls depending on how we want to structure that process.
Can I ask if some of your players use that narrated non-success state as a way to maybe get a win at the table? Are they using it to try to get a laugh out of the people around? Like, I tell him that shirt and those pants don't go together. Also, I ask him for 5 gold, like that sort of thing. Do they work those angles at all?
Not that I've seen that, like them really trying to gamify my wanting them to be successful. Although I am very playful as a game master, and so there's lots of times where like if they're having fun and they're socially attuned with their group enough that they're making a joke for the rest of the group to enjoy, then I certainly don't want to punish that either. Like they've offered something to the group. I want to yes and that so that we can all share in the mirth of their presence.
So in that situation, we might just make this guy a really bad dresser.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden that becomes the inside joke for everyone to enjoy.
He's like wearing plaid and stripes and polka dots, and that's like, now that's part of that character. They just world built that. I literally had the other day I had a group, they went to a blacksmith, and then one of the players was like, hey, blacksmith. And he was like, my name's not Blacksmith. I have a name. You can't call me by my title. I don't call you adventurer. I call you by your name. You have to ask for somebody's name before you just start yelling at them. And then one of the other player goes, oh, his name is Smith Black. And then I was like, yeah, it's right here on my name tag, Smith Black, not Blacksmith. And that was like, that became a thing now, is that they met a blacksmith named Smith Black. And that was like, I was correcting the sort of like, social misstep to not call him, not ask him his name or not make an introduction or whatever, but also sharing in like the mirth and the play of the whole experience.
That is so great. I love every single bit of that. Is just the best.
A long time ago, we had a friend of ours named Hadil. Her Twitter handle is at Twitty Such, and we were talking about D&D with kids because she was also working with Ethan at his at the D&D camp that he was running, and we were talking about the difference between running D&D for adults and running D&D for kids. And like what you were saying, Adam, is the thought that the DM puts into the importance of the safety of the people at the table is always really important. And then it just goes even further when those people are young and still figuring out who they are and what's safe and what they can and can't do. Right. And like you said, it seems like you guys make a very safe and fun and creative place for these kids to explore, which allows them the agency to grow and become whoever they are able to become, right?
It's definitely the sort of self-identity piece is a huge part of what we see as challenges for a lot of our players. You know, our groups range from as young as 8 all the way up into early 20s. And the sort of common issues we see in our groups across different age ranges often reflect the need for self-identity and for self-exploration. We see a lot of our middle school players using different gender pronouns for their characters, or using different ways in which the personalities of their characters come out. And often of times it's an opportunity for them to test the water, see what that's like, see how it is to be identified that way, but also how it is to be like a person who insults people all the time, because it gives you some power over that. And if you've been bullied a lot, or if you've had an opportunity where you're often on the receiving end of insults, being the person who does the insults may be an opportunity to sort of test and see what it's like in the other side. And so oftentimes that's something we want to reward, or at least not necessarily reward insulting people, but give an opportunity to see what the experience is like for doing that.
It's a great way to help kids maybe understand, like, I have a 5-year-old daughter, and I worry every day, how am I going to explain bullying? Because it's such this strange power dynamic thing amongst kids. To have them actually experience that in a safe space, to know, like, oh, there's a reason people do this. Like, it's not right, but I could see why they'd be drawn to it, because it's the quickest way to maybe feel better about themselves or something like that. That could be an incredibly important lesson to learn in a safe space like a D&D table.
In one of the storylines that we ran in the past, we had an experience where the players had to enter into the dreamscape of this sort of solemn monk who had lived his life as a knowledge keeper. And as they went into his dreamscape, they went through his past experiences. And so they went backwards through his life to experience some of the things that he did. So one of the first things that they did is they had to go to the funeral of his wife. And they had to give a touching eulogy for his wife, who they'd never met. But they had to. One of the mechanics that was built in was that they had to fit into the dreamscape. If they seemed like they stuck out too much, the dream would sort of fight against them. It was very Inception inspired.
Yeah, that's cool.
And then after they sort of completed that, they then went on to the wedding with his wife, where he's younger and they're celebrating their wedding, and then they had to bring wedding presents to them and describe what wedding presents they brought. And then eventually we went back in time far enough that we were trying to get early on to find a piece of information that he learned at a very young age. And they got to a place where they were being bullied by him. And this is not something that we would do very lightly. We did this with a lot of knowledge about our players, and a lot of knowledge about the experience that they came in with. This was a very intentionally chosen therapeutic intervention. But the description was basically that the monk who treated them like good friends during the wedding, that clearly these were the people that he grew up loving, and in this situation the players were being bullied, and it was the monk and his friends who were doing the bullying, and the players couldn't fight back. They were smaller, they were weaker, and instead they had to use their words in order to convince the monk to not to change his ways. And they knew that they were successful because in the previous iteration, in the previous thing where they were at the wedding, they saw the monk say, "I'm so glad you said those things to me when I was younger, and you helped me understand how what I was doing was wrong." So we had set up already the idea that they were going to be successful no matter what they did. And that gave them a lot of power in that situation to all of a sudden know, like, all I need to do is say something to him, and get through to him in this moment, and talk to him about how being a bully is maybe not great, and it doesn't need to be who he is. And the responses that we got were just wonderful. We got a chance to see players basically getting to stand up to some of the bullies they might have had in their past, knowing that they couldn't fail here, and that knowing that whatever they said was going to be impactful into the life of this monk who eventually would wind up being their friend.
Success is predicated by the very arc of the narrative. I love that. That is so cool.
That's
that's
like really no, but it's really powerful, and it's really intentional, right? Like there's a lot of Dungeons and Dragons which is improv based, and we talk about that in the show a lot. And the one thing that we don't always mention is that there's some whole, you can walk into a session with your friends and with a few notes here and there, and you can run a Dungeons and Dragons game, right? But the work that you guys do, you improv scenes, and you improv moments, but the intentionality of those kinds of bits, right? There's been a lot of thought and care that has gone on to create that scene. And like you said, Adam, there was that was done far later, and that was done with a lot of knowledge of the people at your table. So that's really important to highlight, especially when you're working with young people or people who are, who need a little bit of help here and there, right?
I would say that there's a lot of planning that has to go into it, and a lot of knowledge about how the players work, but we really do a lot of sort of on the fly, in the moment improvisational change, depending on what the kids are bringing that day. One of the challenges of being in adolescence is figuring out how you relate to authority figures, what risks you're willing to take, and what changes to your identity you're willing to manage navigating that space with adults. And one of the scenarios that I had set up in the game involved the players having to go make a deal with this Dracolich. There's a long, complicated backstory to this, but the basic understanding is that this Dracolich was the last remaining Dracolich, and he was the only thing that exists on the material plane that could help the players defeat these plants that were taking over the world. And I had set up this encounter where Dracoliches are evil. Everybody knows that. They went to this Dracolich, and the Dracolich was going to make a deal with them where he was going to give them the tool or the weapon that they needed to defeat the plants, in exchange that they would go corrupt some dragon eggs and make new Dracoliches. This was like a classic moral conundrum where they were going to have to do some values clarification, talk to each other, figure out what the solution to this could possibly be. Is it worth, right? This is like the pulling the lever the trolley, right? Yeah. A great opportunity for values clarification, which is a really important thing in adolescence. However, the players went to go talk to the Dracolich, and the Dracolich was like, first of all, why should I help you? I am the last of my kind. I have no kin, no family, no friends. Why would I even want to save this world? And then one of my players, I'm expecting them to go because we need you and whatever. We're going to do some values clarification. One of the players goes, yeah, that seems really lonely. I also don't have any friends, and I'm alone all the time too. And and so my Dracolich was like, then you know how I feel. And it was all of a sudden, this Dracolich was a sympathetic character who they got to connect about how hard it is to feel like you're the only one of your kind, that nobody will ever understand you. And then they basically like coach the Dracolich on how to push through this challenging situation. And then they help the Dracolich go corrupt some dragon eggs to make some new Dracolich babies to like totally make sure that he wasn't alone anymore. And the end of the whole story, the Dracolich dies in a battle with the dragon, and it's a big epic moment. But like one of those players' characters retired from the game by we sort of, I do a lot of cinematic descriptions, and I described it as like, you are sitting in like a clutch of dragon eggs that like all hatch to reveal like baby Dracoliches, and they all look up at you and they say, "Are you my mother?"
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Oh man.
So there's lots, but like that's a moment where I was planning for a very specific outcome that I wanted from that scene. I wanted that scene to be about values clarification and about the group aligning on what they cared about and what they thought was worthy, and then having sort of a deal, being able to like barter with this Dracolich around what they thought was reasonable to save the world. And none of that happened. It was all intuitively based on the fact that I knew this player was struggling with depression, struggling with isolation, anxiety, and that having a sympathetic character that was like them in a Dracolich form was really all of the sudden the thing. That was now the scene. It was no longer a scene about a deal with the devil. It was a scene about being lonely.
About finding common ground with the least likely of others. Yeah, that is so great.
And
man, I love this game.
we do check out questions at the end of every session, and it's generally like, what was a spotlight, or what is something you learned? And that player said, "I never expected to have empathy with a Dracolich."
I want to say that the going into the dreams of the monk and going kind of backwards in the narrative, like we have a lot of people we see in the community kind of like poo-poo the idea of like an on rails adventure, and that is going to be my go-to example against that, because if you can craft when it's about the experience and not where you end up, because you know where your destination is, but you've crafted an end game that is meant to evoke a specific experience for these people. That is brilliant. That is the perfect way to use like maybe a more on rails approach. That is now my go-to. Like, no, it is good.
We actually do we do a tremendous amount of world building with our players, and a tremendous amount of sort of collaborative creation in the world, but a lot of our plot lines actually are pretty railed. We have an idea for where the players are going to go next. We know the players are going to meet an NPC who's going to be friendly, who's going to tell them about the oncoming tide of darkness headed in their direction. The thing that we do is that we remain really flexible as to who that NPC could be. So as a dungeon master, you can do a fair amount of like, I know the story has to go in this direction, and it's a part of your job to help tell a good story. It's worthwhile to think about this like a less like a video game and more like major plot points in a book. So now that the players have to talk to somebody, and if they go into the town and they go and you go, the old witch living on the edge of the town, she's the one who would know about these things. And they're like, we don't care about an old witch. We want to go talk to Smith Black, the blacksmith, our good friend. Then they go talk to Smith Black, and now all of a sudden Smith Black is like, hey, I heard this rumor about darkness tides or something. Do you guys know anything about that? And that's sure. Smith Black can be that NPC. Who cares who the one who's telling them the happenings on? It can be anybody. And so being able to react to the players and sort of jump on what they're giving you, but then still make it a compelling story is a really important sort of set of skills to be able to foster as a DM.
Well, that is excellent stuff, guys. It is so awesome to hear all of those anecdotes. It makes me so happy to know that these sort of, therapeutic intervention services, that you folks are out there doing this good work. This is the kind of thing that I as a kid would have absolutely eaten up. So thank you for putting those two good things together, because this is all excellent work.
Yeah, we can't stress how much your guys' work has like inspired us, and even just spending a little bit of time reading up on the things that you guys have done and listening to the stuff that you've talked about online, to even just have to be able to talk to you guys today. It's really inspiring to see the work that you're doing, and clearly the lives that you're changing. Like, we're gonna have to wrap up soon, but I was wondering if you could talk about, like, you created a system,
Critical Core system.
Critical Core. I'm sorry, I was trying to find my notes and I'm rocking a kid, so it's a little one-handed. It's a little bit difficult. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So Critical Core, it has been a project we've had coming up for quite a while. It's actually getting really close to sort of exciting release, or at least to the Kickstarter. So Critical Core is basically, Adam and I have been doing this for about 9 years. And we want to get the work that we're doing, and especially the foundation of using role-playing games for helping people grow and improve their lives, into the hands of more people. There's only so many people we can serve just in our groups. And so we were approached by this organization called McGarry Bowen, who's an advertising organization, who had this idea for therapeutic role-playing game kits. And we said, yes, we would love to help you develop that. And they said, awesome, we've got all this amazing artwork and all these amazing things, but we don't actually know what we're doing when it comes to the therapy part. And we said, well, that's great, because that's the part that we know how to do. And so this was a couple of years ago, and now we've been working with them in putting together basically a take-home starter set, especially for parents and teachers and therapists, to help introduce them into role-playing games, and a module and a facilitator's guide specifically oriented at social skills outcomes for kids and teens, and especially challenges related to autism. And so we've really taken a lot of our experience to create the module and create the facilitator's guide to help make sure that you're guided through that experience. And we're excited it's coming to Kickstarter very, very soon. We're trying to get a lot of signups. Kickstarter's sort of live and die on their mailing list. So you can sign up for the mailing list to find when it comes to Kickstarter with it. Just go to criticalcore.org, and you can sign up for the mailing list there, as well as see more about the kit and more about the cool artwork that we've put into it. And I'm really excited, just as an opportunity to get it into a lot of people's hands and help a lot more parents and teachers and therapists start playing RPGs.
Yeah, Adam and I have actually done lots of presentations to therapists at this point. We've I think over 400 therapists have received continuing education credits learning about Dungeons and Dragons. We were the keynote speakers at the Washington Association of Marriage and Family Therapy, talking about Dungeons and Dragons as a therapeutic intervention.
Oh, that's so cool.
And yeah, it's been a fantastic opportunity to do some outreach into the therapy world. The interesting thing that we've noticed is that we will go up there, we'll talk about our theoretical model, how we use games like Dungeons and Dragons to help kids and teens get positive outcomes. We'll tell some stories. There'll be, laughter and tears in the audience, and they'll be so on board. But a lot of them have never played a game like Dungeons and Dragons before. So there's a big on-ramp to becoming a practitioner who uses Dungeons and Dragons on the scale that Adam and I do with Game to Grow, and what our new facilitators do. So we want Critical Core to be a system that's accessible to brand new players, especially in the neuroatypical crowd. They're really targeted to meet their specific developmental needs. But really, we also wanted to make a simplified game that therapists who are new gamers could play, who could don't have to learn all of the deep rules and lore of a game like Dungeons and Dragons, but can pick up the box, open it up, hand out some character sheets, and get right into collaborative storytelling the way that we did thousands of years ago around a campfire. We learn through story, and we learn through play. That's part of what makes humans humans. And I think that's really what we're trying to target with Critical Core.
It seems like an absolutely amazing product, and like just really feeling like you guys have found a very important part of this community, and the work that you're doing has found a very focused way of helping that out. And I think that Critical Core, personally, like I'm going to sign up as soon as we're done, because like even though I play already and I run with kids, just even talking with you guys, I know that there's things that I can improve about my game. And it would just be so useful to have those resources available, right? For like kids in my building, right? Or like my daughters and their friends, when and if they want to play. So for our listeners, we'll definitely be sending out some tweets and links about that. Where could everyone who's listening to this find you guys on Twitter, both the Game to Grow Twitter handle itself, but both of you particularly as well?
You can find Game to Grow on Twitter at Game to Grow. That's Game TO Grow. That is our main outreach to the social media world. We have a Facebook page. We also, our website has lots of links to other podcasts we've done, panel presentations, articles that have been written a little bit more about how we structure our groups. And so I recommend people check out our website as well. There's also a page on there called Support. And we are a 501c3 nonprofit. So I would love if you were moved by our stories, if you believe in our mission, I would love it if your listeners would stop by there and see how they could make a donation or think about changing their Amazon.com link to smile.amazon.com to support Game to Grow. A little bit goes a long way, and we would love your support as a nonprofit.
And you can find me directly on Twitter. This is Adam Johns. to distinguish. You can find me directly on Twitter at Adam Johns. I was an early adapter for Twitter, so I just got my name.
I was not an early adopter to Twitter, and with a name like Adam Davis, it was already taken. So my Twitter handle is at Sparks for Sharks.
Guys, thank you so much. It has been an absolute honor and privilege to talk to you guys. It has really meant a lot to us. You guys are very busy people, that you've taken time out of your schedules to come and speak with us. And yeah, it really means the world to us and our listeners. And we really look forward to seeing what Game to Grow it continues to do in the future. It's just a really cool thing to see how our community is growing.
Well, thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much. We really had a great time being on.
Thank you once again for listening to another episode of Insight Check. I would like to take a minute to thank Vinswept for doing our amazing intro and outro music, as well as Amy T. Falcone for doing our social branding and our chibi faces. Without you, we'd have no faces, and that's a nightmare. So if you are listening to this on any of your favorite podcasting places, Apple, Google, or if your cat does a podcast, we would really appreciate if you talked to your cat for a minute and gave us a bit of review. Every little bit helps. Sharing this with your friends also helps a lot. So thank you again for spending a bit of time with us, and this
was
Insight
Check. Had to go. His son Naveed, I think, crapped himself, and so I think Air was sitting there for like a good 15 minutes, just surrounded by smelly.
It's dedication right there.